Welcome back, and today we are going to learn about World War II, its causes, and its implications. It is important to learn about the past, as global tensions are at an all-time high as we seem on the brink of another war. This will be the first of a three-part series. In this episode, we will focus on the causes of World War II and how the implications of World War I started the Second World War. Our story starts in 1917. The First World War is slowly turning against the Central Powers. While Russia has surrendered, the Ottoman Empire is slowly falling to British forces and the Arabian revolters. Austria-Hungary is also losing ground, and on the Western Front, the Germans are slowly being pushed back, and it is only a matter of time before they have to surrender. On the 11th of November, 1918, an armistice was declared. This armistice was signed in Compiègne in France. Effectively, this armistice stopped all fighting. A fun fact about this armistice was that it was signed on the 11th minute of the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. This was then followed by the Treaty of Versailles, which contained a war guilt clause which made Germany accept full responsibility for the war. It also included other points, such as disarmament. Germany was limited to 100,000 soldiers, no tanks or air force, and a navy with only 6 battleships. Demilitarization. The Rhineland, an area of Germany on the border with France, was demilitarized for 15 years. The League of Nations. The treaty called for the creation of the League of Nations, an institution that Wilson strongly supported. The League of Nations predated the modern United Nations. Overseas colonies. Germany was required to give up all of its overseas colonies. Portions of Upper Silesia and the province of Posen were ceded to Poland. Memel was ceded to the Allied and Associated Powers. The city of Danzig and its hinterland were ceded to the League of Nations to establish the Free City of Danzig. The treaty was so harsh on Germany because they believed that Germany was responsible for starting the First World War. Their evidence for this was in 1914, after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, when it was just Austria and Serbia fighting, that if Germany did not defend their ally and help Austria, then the whole war would have been prevented. As when Germany mobilized for war, this sparked the Russians and the French to mobilize and join the war on the side of Serbia. Due to the points of the treaty mentioned above, Germans were humiliated. Due to the treaty, 13% of core German territory was lost. 10% of its population, or 6.5 and 7 million Germans, now found themselves in other nations, and Germany lost all of its colonies. The monarchy in Germany was abolished, and a new government was proclaimed. Germany was now known as the Weimar Republic, which lasted between 1919 and 1933. During this period of time, Germany was mostly focused on repaying its debt to the Allied nations. This payment totaled to around 60 to 123 billion marks, or between 760 billion and $1 trillion in today's money. This was crippling debt and meant that during the period known as the Weimar Republic, a lot of the focus would be on repaying that debt. But even so, the time between 1923 and 1929 were the golden years of the Republic. During this time, there was also a period of hyperinflation. In March of 1923, $1 was equal to 20,000 Reichsmarks, but in November of the same year, that number jumped to 4.2 trillion marks. The monthly inflation rate was 1,000%. This meant that people's savings were virtually wiped out. This hindered the GDP growth of Germany and its innovation. This caused much anger among the populace who wanted change. Unemployment was high, sitting between 2 to 1 million people unemployed. Even though there were so many problems, the economy flourished, and it was still rebuilding. The arts and sciences flourished too, with many global art exhibits having dedicated sections to the art made in Weimar Germany. Most of this growth was financed through American loans. The GDP of Germany was finally able to grow. In 1923, a rabble-rousing politician, who was recently unknown till now, launched a riot in Munich. The politician's name was Adolf Hitler, and this was his first attempt at seizing power. Over the course of the 20s, the right in Germany grew in strength. Due to the revolt, Hitler was thrown in prison and was imprisoned for 5 years. In jail is when he wrote his famous book Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. 1929 was a changing point in the trajectory of Germany. The Great Depression and the Wall Street market crash caused one of the biggest, if not the biggest, economic catastrophe ever in modern history. A stock market crash that started in America spread across the globe, causing massive economic downturn. This hit Europe and East Asia particularly hard, and Germany was one of the hardest hit nations. Thousands of banks had closed down, industrial production had halved, widespread poverty. Now, 1/3 of all Germans were unemployed. During the Great Depression, America needed payments on its loans it gave to Germany. This caused more economic downturn due to the government spending more money on repaying the loans, resulting in its GDP growth being negative 15.7%. This led to more political violence, polarity, and conflict. On one side of the spectrum were the communists, and on the other side were the nationalists. Each side blamed each other for causing the economic downturn and promised to fix the issues if elected. Let's take a look at some of these policies. The KPD was founded on communist principles and adhered to Marxism-Leninism. Especially after the mid-1920s, this meant advocating for a classless society and the abolition of private property. The KPD was strongly opposed to fascism and played a significant role in the resistance against the Nazi regime. They viewed the Social Democrat Party, the SPD, as social fascist and considered all other parties in the Weimar Republic as fascists. The KPD supported international solidarity among the working class and was affiliated with the Communist Internationale, or the Comintern, which aimed to promote global communist revolutions. The KPD advocated for nationalization of key industries, land reform, and the redistribution of wealth to achieve economic equality. They promoted workers' rights, social welfare programs, and gender equality. The KPD also supported cultural and educational initiatives to spread the communist ideology. The KPD had paramilitary wings like the other parties and engaged in street battles with political opponents, particularly the Nazis. They mostly composed of poor workers and farmers. The nationalists. Less than Nazis, mostly consisted of former military and conservative officials. The 4-year plan, which was proposed by Hermann Göring, this plan aimed to rapidly increase Germany's war production capacity by prioritizing the production of armaments, synthetic fuels, strategic materials within a 4-year time frame. The Nazi regime wanted to heavily regulate the economy and wanting to take control of key industries and businesses through nationalization or forced consolidation. Public works programs. Large public works programs were planned, like the Autobahn, and these constructions would be used to create jobs and stimulate the economy while also serving their military objectives. The Nazis strived to achieve self-sufficiency by limiting imports and heavily promoting domestic production of goods, even if it meant higher costs. Strict labor laws would be enforced by the German Labor Front, limiting workers' rights, controlled wages, and mandated work in vital industries. The Nazis were also very anti-Jewish. Jewish businesses would be systematically targeted for exclusion from the economy and eventually leading to their forced expropriation and liquidation. In 1933, the Nazi Party had grown to the largest party in the Reichstag, with a staggering 44% of the seats. On January the 30th, 1933, President Hindenburg made Hitler Chancellor of Germany to appease the Nazis. On the 27th of February, the Reichstag burned down in an arson attack. 1.5 years later, on August the 19th, 1934, Hitler became the Führer, or supreme leader of Germany, with 90% of the popular vote. The time period between 1933 and 1939 was a period in which Europe would dramatically change. As soon as Hitler came into power, he transformed Germany from a republic into dictatorship. Many Germans supported him, as they felt that radical change was needed to fix the country. This was similar to how the French supported Napoleon after the Revolution. His policies were as followed. Rearmament. Rearmament was a major source of economic growth, creating millions of jobs. The Nazis began rearmament almost immediately after Hitler came into power, but it wasn't officially announced until 1935. The Nazis built hospitals, schools, and public buildings like the 1936 Olympic Stadium. Autarky. The Nazis tried to achieve autarky or economic self-sufficiency. The Nazis also introduced import tariffs, and they privatized state-owned industries. They also added wage controls and price controls to make sure that wages wouldn't grow too much and prices wouldn't go out of control. Many Germans were also forced to ration consumer goods, like fruit, poultry, and clothing, as many of these resources went to building up the military. From 1933 to 1939, the German real GDP grew by 55%, and the yearly GDP grew by about 5% annually, and even seeing double-digit growth, from 60 billion Reichsmarks to over 100 billion Reichsmarks. Many of the economic problems that plagued Germany also got solved too. Under Johann Ludwig, chief finance minister, German weekly wages grew by 19%, and unemployment, which had 30% when the Nazis came into power, became close to 0% unemployment towards 1939. Even the amount of women employed increased too, with the amount of women employed between 1937 and 1939 increasing by 2 million. Another major achievement was the stabilizing of the German currency, which had suffered from severe hyperinflation and deflation. To stop this, a new currency was created. This temporary currency was called the Rentenmark, which gave a currency that the Germans could finally depend on. All of this supplemented Hitler's goals of military rearmament. The military industry expanded too. Under Hitler, the major companies who agreed with the goals of the Reich got the government contracts for weapons in return for subsidies and tax breaks. A modern example of this is the American industrial complex. Germany was able to cover up the rearmament by creating MIFO bills, which were, in their simplest terms possible, government IOUs to companies that had to be renewed every 90 days and could be exchanged for money. This made it hard to find a paper trail that connected the government to rearming. The army grew exponentially during this time too. In 1934, there were 300,000 people in the army. Then, on the 16th of March, Hitler reintroduced conscription for all men above the age of 18. In 1939, the Wehrmacht, or German army, numbered close to 2.7 to 3 million men in the army, including reservists. This was impressive because at the same time, the French army numbered at around 5 million, the British just under 1 million, and the Soviet Union's army numbered at around 3 million. Although it should be noted that information on the size of the Red Army at this time is hard to find, and it could be inaccurate due to the classification of these materials. Germany also technologically pulled past the Allies, and had at the time one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the world. Germany had some of the best designed tanks, mechanized vehicles, aircraft, and submarines. Some notable examples are the Panzer IIA, the Panzer IIIs, the Bf-109, including its variants, and the Type 7 U-boats. Germany also territorially increased in size during this time too. In March of 1936, Germany remilitarized the Rhineland. The Rhineland is the heart of German industry and resources. Then, in 2 years, in 1938, Austria would be annexed by the German Reich. A poll after the annexation showed that 99% of people approved this decision, although it should be noted that this report may be biased by the Nazis. Hitler then turned to German-speaking people elsewhere. His next focus was in the German-speaking minority in Czechoslovakia, in the region known as the Sudetenland. Even though all of his actions violated the Treaty of Versailles, the Allies did nothing to stop Germany. This is because they were in no position to stop Germany. They were economically unprepared and were dealing with internal unrest too. The rise of fascism in Italy during the early 20th century was fueled by a combination of economic turmoil, social unrest, and national disillusionment following World War I. After the war, Italy faced significant challenges, including high unemployment, inflation, and a sense of betrayal over the territorial gains promised by the Triple Entente. Many Italians felt that their sacrifices during the First World War had not been rewarded adequately. leading to widespread discontent and a desire for a strong leadership. This environment provided fertile ground for Benito Mussolini, who captivated on the nationalist sentiments and the fears of communism to promote his fascist ideology, advocating for a centralized, authoritarian government that promised order and stability. The perception of betrayal by the Triple Entente significantly contributed to the rise of fascism. During the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Italy was largely dissatisfied with the outcomes of the Treaty of Versailles. Despite being a victor in the war, Italy received less territory than anticipated, which many Italians referred to as mutilated victory. Imagine being promised $1 million, then only receiving 100. This sentiment of betrayal fueled nationalist fervor and resentment towards the Entente powers and the political elite in Italy. Mussolini expertly harnessed this discontent, portraying himself as a leader who could restore Italy's national pride and rectify the previous injustices inflicted by the international community. As the 1920s progressed, Italy faced severe economic challenges, exacerbated by the global Great Depression that began in 1929. The economic downturn led to widespread unemployment, increased poverty, and social strife, creating a volatile atmosphere in which extremist ideologies could thrive. The instability promoted many Italians to seek radical solutions, viewing Mussolini's fascist regime as a necessary response to the economic crisis. The government implemented various policies aimed at economic recovery, including public works programs and the promotion of industrial self-sufficiency, which helped to consolidate Mussolini's power and further suppress dissent. Italy sought to expand its empire in Africa, viewing Ethiopia as a target due to its historical significance and resources. The invasion was also influenced by a desire to avenge Italy's defeat in the First Italo-Ethiopian War. On October 3, 1935, Italy launched a full-scale invasion under the leadership of Benito Mussolini. The Italian forces, equipped with modern weaponry and chemical agents, faced Ethiopian troops who were poorly equipped but fiercely determined. Despite the initial setbacks, the Ethiopian Empire Haile Selassie rallied his forces and called for international assistance, appealing to the League of Nations. However, significant aid did not materialize. The Italian military quickly advanced, capturing the capital of Addis Ababa. On May 5, 1936, Ethiopia was declared an Italian colony, and Mussolini proclaimed the establishment of the Italian East Africa. The invasion was marked by brutal tactics, including the use of chemical weapons, which drew international condemnation. Despite the occupation, Ethiopian resistance continued, and Haile Selassie later became a symbol of African independence. The interwar period in Japan was marked by significant political, economic, and social changes that shaped the nation's trajectory. Following World War I, Japan experienced a brief economic boom, benefiting from wartime production and expanding its influence in Asia. However, the 1920s brought about a series of challenges, including political instability, social unrest, and the onset of the Great Depression in 1929. These factors created a fertile ground for militarism and nationalism to gain prominence, setting the stage for Japan's aggressive expansion in the years leading up to World War II. During the interwar years, Japan saw the rise of militarism, which shared similarities with fascism in Europe. As economic woes deepened, the military began to exert increasing influence over the government, promoting the idea that Japan's survival depended on territorial expansion. Nationalist sentiments were amplified by a belief that Japan's superiority and a desire to create a greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere. The military's control over politics led to the suppression of dissent, as political parties and democratic institutions were undermined in favor of a more authoritarian regime that prioritized military objectives. Japan's expansionist policies culminated in the invasion of China in the 1930s, driven by both economic and strategic motives. The need for raw materials and markets for Japanese goods intensified as the Great Depression strained Japan's economy. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, establishing a puppet state. which marked a significant escalation in its imperial ambitions. The invasion was justified by claims of protecting Japanese interests and promoting stability in the region, but it was met with international condemnation. Nevertheless, the military's grip on power continued to strengthen as they preferred further territorial expansion. The Great Depression had a profound impact on Japan, exacerbating existing economic vulnerabilities. As global trade contracted, Japan faced skyrocketing unemployment, falling prices, and widespread poverty. The economic crisis contributed to a growing belief that military expansion could provide the solutions, as acquiring new territories was seen as a way to secure resources and markets. Consequently, the government redirected its focus towards militarization and expansion, believing that aggressive foreign policies would alleviate domestic problems and restore national pride. 1939. Nazi Germany wants to keep expanding, and its next target is Poland. They wanted the city of Danzig to be part of the Reich again. They delivered an ultimatum: give Danzig or face war. Germany had also signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. In this pact, they agreed to not attack each other, trade agreements for food and metals, and create spheres of influence in Eastern Europe. This also included the division of Poland. The Allies, seeing that Germany needed to be stopped, drew a line in the sand: invade Poland and it's war. While the Allies were still unprepared for war, even after starting rearmament, they were still willing to face Germany. This did not scare Hitler, who gave the directive to invade Poland. On September the 1st, the German army and air force started incursions into Polish territory. This was soon followed by a declaration of war by France and Britain. Thank you all for watching to the end, and please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. That's all for this video. See you next time.